Today's edition of the podcast is brought to you by Coach Me Plus. Coach Me Plus is the leader in athlete management software and a product that I've been lucky enough to be using for a little over a year now. Only rivaled by the impeccable customer service that Kevin and his staff provides, Coach Me Plus's ability to constantly be amoeba-like in their ability to mold and matriculate what you're trying to get across and bring together is absolutely fantastic. Their constant pursuit of better ways and better methods and innovations and progress to their own product is absolutely fantastic. Go over to CoachMePlus.com. Check out what they got, guys. It's something that I guarantee you won't be disappointed with. Hello and welcome to the podcast. Today, guys, I have the absolute pleasure of sitting down with the Seattle Seahawks and OptimumSportPerformance.com's Patrick Ward. Today, guys, Patrick's going to share with us his role with the Seahawks and how he determines what he's going to monitor and the methods he's going to use with the athletes that he's working with up in Seattle. Actually, that's like some really cool breakdowns of how he decided what means and methods to use to figure out how he was going to monitor the guys. And we talk quite a bit about RP as a tool and ways to set it up, ways to make sure that you're getting the most out of it, how it covers so many different bases and just a wide array of different things, and how it correlates very well with a lot of other tools that people like to use nowadays. And how conversation is driven in his position, because obviously in a pro sport environment, it's going to be a little different, especially when you're working within a team There's really some fascinating stuff in here, guys, like some stuff that you can take and implement tomorrow with your athletes. I hope you guys enjoy this talk as much as I did. Let's get right to it. Patrick, thanks for being on today, bud.
Hey, thanks. Good morning. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so let's start out talking about your role up there in Seattle.
Yeah, so I'm going into my third season now here in Seattle with the Seahawks. I guess the title of the role is a sports science analyst, but mainly I just do pretty much analytics the whole day, and that's across multiple kind of departments and multiple different projects. In season, it's a lot of probably what you would expect in terms of training, monitoring, and things like that. But I get to do other analysis as well. But that's probably the stuff that you're most interested in, which is the stuff centered around training and weekly preparation and things like that. And so basically what I kind of do is try and put in place best practice methods for collecting the data so that it's kind of as clean and neat and tidy as you can make it in the chaotic world of team sport. And then I put together the analysis as well, and how we look at that data and make sense of it and contextualize it and explain it to other people within the building so that they can hopefully utilize it to drive some decisions.
That's awesome. So let's first talk about what you individually are looking at when it comes to making these decisions.
Yeah. So there's lots of tools and technologies out there. I think it's probably a little bit of sports science going on mad right now with all the things that are kind of out there on the market. I think it's best to keep things simple. If we think about training monitoring, we want to know something about what the athlete did, external load, so the athlete's actual outputs. We want to know something about the internal response, so how the athlete tolerated the training session. And then we want to know something about how the athlete adapts over time or responds over time. So like I said, there's lots of technologies you can use. Some are better than others. I think one of the main roles for sports scientists is really to evaluate technologies and appraise them and understand things like reliability and validity and signal to noise. So with a lot of the stuff that we use, I do in-house reliability studies so that we understand the error measurement, we understand the variance that we might expect, the typical error that we might expect. We understand things like that so that we can make very specific statements about when changes are real or when they're trivial or within what we would normally expect the error to be. And the tools that we mainly use are for the training piece. Integrated micro technologies are certainly very popular. Things like GPS and accelerometer data is something that is useful. We use RPE as our internal load metric. Heart rate is a little bit challenging for the football guys just because it's always kind of getting hit and knocked around because there's so much contact. So, I gave it about a year and a half of doing that, and I was just ending up cleaning up a lot of heart rate traces and stuff like that. So it was kind of more of a pain in the butt. But the RPE is pretty good for that. So we use that as our internal load metric. And then the kind of long-term look at the athlete, the adaptation over time comes from just a simple, easy wellness questionnaire of 4 questions. And we summate those and we get a total wellness score, and we look at those and evaluate those over time. I think there's always this interest to collect as much stuff as possible, and people want to buy every single technology under the sun, and they get excited about stuff. But in reality, I think most of the time that just clouds the picture. And so you go and listen to people speak, and they show you their elaborate dashboard of 20 different things, and then you ask them, well, what if only 2 of these are bad one day and 18 are good? And they might reply with something like, well, we only really look at these 3. So then let's remove get all that stuff out of the picture and just focus on those 3. And so I think one of the things that we try and do, or that I try and do, is take the things that we're looking at and try and explain them with just excruciating detail, down to like every single way you could possibly look at it, understand those metrics, understand everything about them in the context with which we apply. So those are the 3 main things that we use. We do some stuff with sleep as well, but those are the 3 main kind of day-to-day practices.
What are the questions on the questionnaire that you guys look at?
Yeah, just a simple energy, sleep, soreness, and stress. There's a paper by Blake McLean and Aaron Coots and Vincent Kelly, and it was in the International Journal of Sports Physiology and Performance. I think it was like 2012 or 2013. And it was a paper that was looking at the time course of recovery between different fixtures in the National Rugby League. So, time course of recovery between 5 days between a game, 7 days between a game, 10 days between a game. And they used a lot of different metrics. They used salivary metrics and jump force plate data, so flight time and contact time type of things. And they had a simple kind of 5 question wellness questionnaire in there, 1 through 5 scale, very easy to use. So that's something that, I think if people are looking into that, I mean, it's super easy to do. If you grab the paper, you can probably find it online for free somewhere. And just take the questionnaire. If you don't have any money, literally all you need is a notebook and a piece of paper, or Google Docs is really easy. That's what I've used in the past. Just email it out, and the athletes respond in the morning. So something that simple. If you can get really good at analyzing it or making sense of it, you can hopefully do some real good with it. Of course, subjective measures, the big argument against them is always that people can lie. Players can game the system. And you're going to have guys that do that. And when you start to analyze it, you're going to quickly see the guys who always answer for every single day. And you either have a conversation with them or you just remove it, from their daily thing. And that's fine. I think, I'd say if you get the whole team to do it and there's 5 or 6 guys who try and game it, you're doing pretty good. So you're always going to have guys, no matter what you do, whether it's monitoring stuff or whether it's even training stuff, who aren't, as you're going to have guys who, saying that, questionnaires are subjective is like saying, the guy doesn't have to squat really hard if he doesn't want to. And it's like, yeah, he doesn't. If he doesn't want to work out real hard, he probably can go in the gym and sandbag it, and you'll get frustrated with him, but that's kind of what you deal with human beings sometimes.
Yeah, no doubt. They can fake it till they make it anywhere, you know?
That's right. That's right.
So let's piggyback on subjective stuff and let's talk a little bit. You mentioned
Yeah.
RPE as well, and you
Yeah.
found some neat things with that. So let's touch on that here for a minute.
Yeah. I mean, RPE is a really simple metric. So for those that don't know, we use the Borg CR10 scale. This comes out of Carl Foster's work right around like the 1998 2000 time period. There was a paper in Journal Strength Conditioning in Med Science and Sport, and basically it's a 0 to 10 scale, and it's sort of a derivative off of the original Gunnar Borg scale, which was like 6 to 18 or 6 to 20. Basically, a way of evaluating heart rate and the person's perception, and then trying to understand the relationship between those two things, so that maybe you don't always need a heart rate monitor or something like that in, say, cardiac rehab, for example. And the way the Borg CR10 scale works is a simple 0 to 10 scale. At the end of the training session, the athlete answers. There's some verbiage on there. We in terms of like easy, maximal, moderate, etc. If you Google it, you'll find the scale. It's all over the place. We put colors with ours, so different things appeal to different learning styles. So numbers, we have colors, we have words. There's pretty much everything there that you need, and we get the athletes to answer the question, basically, how hard was your workout, at the end of the training session. The typical convention was always that you should wait about 15 to 30 minutes post-training to obtain the person's RPE. The reason for that was the idea of terminal RPE, terminal rating of perceived exertion, which basically just means that the athlete will give you a rating. If you ask them right after the workout, they'll give you a rating of the last thing that they did. So let's say you did really hard 8-minute interval training or something, something really, really challenging. The athlete is going to rate the entire session is of that last thing that they did. Whereas if you wait some time, maybe 15 or 30 minutes, they let them settle down a little bit. They can be a little more reflective. Of course, there's been some other work now that's come out. Aaron Kutz's group has done a little bit of this, looking at even closer times. So maybe we don't need to wait that long. Maybe we can get it in 5 or 10 minutes and still get the same type of data. And obviously, this is very helpful for people in situations like yourself or us, where you can't necessarily have the guys hang out for 30 minutes after a session. They got to go to class, they got to go to meetings, media obligations, etc. So that certainly helps. But we have the athletes answer the question. It's best if you can to try and get the athletes to anchor themselves to the questionnaire in some way. So one of the ways that we used to do this, with Canada basketball, was we had the kids all run a yo-yo intermittent recovery test, and basically they'd max themselves out, and once they'd hit that their 2 faults, which basically knocks them out of the test, we'd show them the scale while they're rolling around on the ground, and they've just probably hit a max heart rate, so we get that as well, and we get running speed, so it's kind of a catch-all. We'd show them the scale and say, okay, think about how you feel right now on this scale, and then going forward with all of your practices, think about what those practices feel like in relationship to this, in order to rate yourself appropriately. So anchor them as best you can to the scale. For us, our practices in training camp, the first several practices are real gut busters. So that's kind of a good way to help them get their bearings. RP, like I said, it's again simpler. The questionnaire, it's something simple. You can do it with a Google Doc. You could do it with a piece of paper and pencil. It's been shown in the literature to have a good relationship with heart rate, which is very helpful, and that's why it's often been thought of as an internal load metric. There's been some interesting research that has come out in the past several years in collision sport athletes, such as rugby and NRL is rugby, AFL athletes rather, in conjunction with some more externally driven outputs like accelerometer data or collisions or high-speed running or things like that. And there's some good relationship there as well. Some of our work that we did, at the NSCA National Conference, I had a poster looking at the RPE metric along with some accelerometer data in American football athletes. And what we did was we looked at the within individual correlation coefficient. So basically, what we could expect on the individual athlete level, the relationship between those two things. And across most of the position groups, except for running backs, was a little bit challenging. But part of that, I think, is just it's such a small position group, so there might not have been enough data. You typically don't carry as many running backs as you would, wide receivers or defensive backs or offensive line or something like that. But on the whole, for the team, the within subject correlation was quite good between the RPE and the accelerometer-driven data. So that tells me that even if you don't have some sort of accelerometer, if you educate the athletes well enough on the RPE and you weed out the guys who are going to lie and try and game it, you can still have a pretty good objective measure of what took place in training, and then you can kind of go from there and start to objectify some of your sessions without having to worry about having lots of technology, which is a great place for people to start to wrap their head around. How do I begin to describe things like microcycle periodization or daily training for an athlete or a position group, and then a microcycle, and then maybe a quarter of a season, and then maybe a macrocycle, the entire season, something like that.
I think that whole idea of that grounding and finding, what is that 9 or 10, like, really,
Yeah,
is
yeah, that's right.
absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, that's always the challenging thing, I think, is the other thing is because it's perceptual, it's not driven off of sometimes what you as the coach would believe. And so there's been some research on this as well, like the discrepancy between a coach's RPE and the player's RPE. Brink and colleagues looked at this in, I think it was like 2012 or 2013 as well, in like really high level soccer athletes. I think they were like the 17 and 18-year-old kids at a club. And basically they were looking at the discrepancy between how the coach rates a session by watching it visibly and how the players rate the session by actually physically going through it. And the coach tends to underestimate how the players perceive the session to be. And certainly, like, you'll find this to be true because the coach in their mind writes the training program. Your basketball coach, he's going to write the drills and all that stuff for the day with his mind thinking like, okay, this is a hard training session and it's going to be a real gut buster. The thing is that the players are coming to that training session with all this residual fatigue from games and, multiple games and multiple practices. And so that training session that the coach believes is a 6 or a 7, let's say a 7, might very well be a 7 under normal circumstances. But if it's week 6 of your season and the kids have played 7 for the coach, might actually be an 8.5 or a 9 for the players, which might, actually be substantial. And, figuring out what changes are substantial, that's really important. But that might be something that's actually really, really meaningful. And then all of a sudden the coach needs to hopefully take the advice and make some adjustments so that you don't cook the kids. But that's more to the social science of things in terms of how you help with behavior change and help with education and things like that.
Well, let's run right with that because we've talked about a lot of really cool things and a lot of things that people, really, you need a pen and a piece of paper to be able to implement. But if it doesn't drive a conversation, it doesn't matter. So how in your position,
Mm-hmm.
does that work? Is that going, are you going directly to a player? Are you going to a coach, a position coach? Are you going right to Coach Carroll? Like, how does that work?
Yeah. So the way it works for us is, I guess, similar to the setup is similar to maybe like Australian sport or something like that, where we have a high performance manager. So I have a boss, Sam. And he's really good. He oversees everything. So medical and strength and conditioning and our department. He kind of aggregates that information and is sort of the connection to Pete. So that Pete just has to talk to one person, get all the information, et cetera. So the way it works for us is I'll do all the analysis. I'll produce presentations, and then I'll present all that data daily, twice a day in the morning in terms of wellness, in the evening in terms of what happened in training. And then from that, he'll get the message in terms of, okay, what do we need to relay, et cetera. I mean, and that's not to say that like we won't talk to the head coach or we won't talk to other coaches. They'll certainly come down and have conversations and ask questions. But for the most part, he's kind of the main connection piece between all of that information rolling up. Just because there's a million people trying to talk to the head coach, so if you have one person, that's kind of helpful. With the players, yeah, some of the players get interested in their data, so I'll put together reports for them as well. And we'll walk them through it myself or one of the other guys working there. We'll walk them through it depending on what they'd like to know and talk them through what it means, etc. I also will do reports for our medical staff for guys returning to play in terms of using data to objectify the rehabilitation process and then the integration back into the practice environment. So yeah, it's more about me trying to get the data, contextualize it, and put it into something that's meaningful for them to make sense of, rather than just hard numbers and lots of charts and graphs.
No, that's awesome. And I think that in all these situations, there needs to be the one person that everything funnels through because there's so much going on.
Yeah, there's just so many voices. Sport, whether it's college or professional, is chaotic, and everybody has, coaches have an opinion, and players have an opinion, and the media has an opinion. There's all this white noise kind of going on around the head coach, and so sometimes if you just have one person who can deliver the message, it's a little easier because he doesn't have to hear it from five different people who might say the same thing five different ways, and it might get confusing and the information gets jumbled up. It's like playing telephone with third graders.
Oh, no doubt.
So, yeah.
No, that's awesome. So then we had Neil from the Dodgers on a couple weeks ago, and he talked about a
Yeah.
bunch of all this stuff. And this one point that he brought up, I thought was fascinating, and something that a lot of people who aren't, in the league, whichever league it may be, don't understand. But what role does the Players Association have in dictating what you may or may not be able to look at or communicate?
Yeah. That's always the Players Association is looking out for the best interest of the players. Like, for example, there was a big article last year about sleep and some of the teams who made things mandatory, and that kind of rubbed players the wrong way because now you're monitoring them away from the building, away from the training facility. Is that legal, legitimate? Whatever. For us, nothing is mandatory in our building. And that's a head coach's rule. So I can't, or none of us can, tell a player that they have to do something. It's by choice. So a big thing for us is how you educate the players in order to get them to have trust in what it is you're doing, that you have their best interests at heart. And so, it didn't, the first year is always rough going. It was tough. It was a challenge. You'd set out 20 GPS units and you'd get 5 guys to wear them, but as the year went on, that grew and compliance went up, and now I can put out 63 units, and we can get 85 or 90% compliance on all the questionnaires, and the ones that aren't compliant are because they're running in late and we didn't have time, or you're trying to chase down 63 guys and all this stuff is going on. It's madness. So and that's in a non-mandatory environment, so we're quite proud of the compliance that we do have, without forcing people to do anything, which is nice, because I think the players union doesn't probably like when you force players to do stuff like that. So it's been quite good, actually.
No, that's awesome. Because, yeah, like, Neil was talking about how in Major League Baseball, like, they negotiate that in the CBAs. And that was, to me, that was like, holy cow. That's a really good
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. No, it can definitely be a challenge. The other thing I think is like that's why another big thing that I talk about, right, is trying to minimize the things that try to get the few things that you think are really important and just focus on those rather than creating more touch points. Athletes have tons of touch points. By the time they walk in the building, think about if you're at a club that's trying to do a million things. It's like, hey, okay, walk in the building, lie down, do heart rate variability, spit in this thing, prick your finger, do this questionnaire. Now you got to go to media. Now you got to meet with your coach. Now you got to have now you have practice. Now you have another interview. Now you have coach or you have position meetings. They have a million touch points, and you're trying to just gather all this stuff from them. And so to me, it's like, can we have less touch points but be more meaningful with the things that we do collect, or can we collect things that are sort of part of the scenery, right? It's like the idea of being seen but not heard. Like, if I can collect things at practice that they're already doing that can inform us on something that's important without having to ask them to do an extra thing or an extra test, that's really, really valuable, because it decreases the touch points. It decreases their sort of frustration that can build up with having to always be doing things. Because the season, it gets old. You're with these guys a long time during a season, all day, every day. You see them every day. And so, you don't want to be that guy who's just constantly there and trying to get something, etc. So trying to decrease the touch points is really, really important. And then, if CBAs in all of the sports, whether it's football or basketball or baseball, decide like we don't want any more, accelerometer monitoring or things like that, I think it would be bad because you're doing it, for the health of the player. But if you're really good with things like RPE, and we've studied that relationship well enough to know that it's important, we can scale back to simpler methods and still know that we're getting good information because now we've had some time to figure out the best analysis to put around it, figure out the best ways to collect it and objectify it and report it. So that can also be helpful as well.
No, and I think that, you know, on top of the idea of having that grounded, this is the pinnacle point, making it as organic as possible with how you're collecting the data is such a huge point.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, like, if you think about like, let's say what you do in practice. So you probably warm the guys up in basketball practice.
Hmm.
If you have like some section of that warm up that's like standardized, that would be something that's really easy to, sort of chunk out of your heart rate data or accelerometer data, whatever you're collecting. It might be easy to chunk that out and use that as sort of a daily evaluation. If you standardize like some sort of shuttle run or some sort of activity, so finding those artifacts that can be useful, in terms of objectifying the process without having to go the step of doing something extra, can always be good, provided that you'll get down to the nitty gritty and understand how repeatable it is and what the noise is and things like that.
No, man, that's absolutely fantastic. And Patrick, I think that that is a perfect spot to leave people at here because when we're talking about all of these things, it comes back to two things. You got to have that base to know exactly what these numbers mean, and you've got to have the ability to communicate and talk with people and drive decisions. And I
Right.
can't thank you enough for taking the time to be with us today, brother. This is killer.
Thanks. Appreciate the opportunity, and yeah, hopefully people will find some use out of it.
Yeah, man. There's about 30 minutes of gems in here. Thank you so much, my friend.
Awesome. Appreciate it.
All right, we'll be in touch real soon, Patrick. Thanks. And a huge thanks again to the Seattle Seahawks and OptimumSportPerformance.com's Patrick Ward for taking the time out to talk with us today. Guys, just a ton of awesome stuff when it comes to the world of monitoring. So many things that are so similar to what Kevin said back in episode 2 that, it seems that, these are the points that need to be made and the situations that arise and what people need to think more about. Limit what you're doing to what you can actually control and use only the information that is going to dictate your decisions. And from there, drive conversation, drive education, keep moving forward. Patrick's absolutely, one of the best in the world at what he does, and I'm really excited that we were able to have him on because there was a billion gems in this talk. I really do hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. And if you did, guys, please share it through the social media outlet of your choice. Again, just trying to drive conversation. Would love to hear what you think. Tweet it, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, whatever it may be. Share it out there, guys. Again, just trying to get great information out to all the great coaches out there. And we really do appreciate everything you guys do for us here at Central Virginia Sport Performance. We will be back next week with another awesome guest. We will see you then.